Every war has an official explanation. But history, if we're willing to study it carefully, shows something far more troubling. The official explanation is rarely the full story. Rarely, in fact, does it touch the deeper currents, the hidden calculations, the incentives driving the decisions that ultimately shape lives, nations, and entire regions. Israel tells us it's defending itself. The United States tells us it's supporting an ally against growing threats. And the world watches as violence escalates, civilians are displaced, cities burn, and the region teeters on the edge of something far more dangerous than what appears in headlines. But here's the question that nobody seems willing to ask, the question that cuts through the rhetoric and the press releases. What if the reasons we are given, the official justifications, are only part of the story? What if they obscure as much as they reveal? Today, we're going to examine Israel's strategic objectives. The motives that rarely make it past the diplomatic briefings or the official statements. We'll explore the implications of U.S. involvement, deliberate or otherwise, and why every decision in this theater has consequences that ripple far beyond the Middle East. And we'll look at the patterns in history, the patterns that suggest that regional wars rarely stay regional, no matter how much we wish they would. Because if history teaches us anything, it is this: the most consequential wars often begin with narratives carefully crafted to make the public believe they are reactive, defensive, unavoidable. And yet, once the machinery of conflict is in motion, it is rarely stopped by appeals to logic or morality. On the surface, the story seems simple. Israel claims it is defending its borders. Iranian-backed forces allegedly pose an imminent threat. Preemptive strikes, the argument goes, are necessary to protect national security. And yes, every nation has the right to defend itself. That is undeniable. But we must ask, what else is happening behind closed doors? Because when conflicts expand as rapidly as this one has, when the violence spreads from one location to another in a matter of days, the official narrative often only scratches the surface. It explains the what, but rarely the why. History offers a clear guide. Governments, when planning military action, often frame their decisions as reactive, defensive. Necessary even when the strategy is deeply proactive, calculated, and aimed at achieving objectives far beyond the immediate battlefield. Take, for example, past conflicts in the Middle East. The 1967 Six-Day War was portrayed as preemptive defense, yet the underlying objectives included regional domination, control over critical waterways, and strategic leverage over neighboring states. The 1991 Gulf War was sold as liberating Kuwait, yet it also involved recalibrating regional power, demonstrating U.S. military reach, and reshaping alliances. So what we see now is part of historical pattern. The public is presented with the narrative defense, immediate threat, security imperative. And yet strategy rarely aligns perfectly with the story being told. We need to ask the uncomfortable question: could there be a deeper calculus at work? Could every strike, every incursion, and every military maneuver be simultaneously serving objectives that are less visible, long-term, strategic, political, even economic? Visualize it: maps showing territory, military bases, proxy networks, and then consider how these align with official statements. The difference between narrative and strategy becomes stark. The difference between what we are told and what we need to understand is enormous. Defense in theory is straightforward. Protect borders, safeguard civilians, neutralize immediate threats. Strategic calculus, however, is far more complex. It involves projecting power, limiting rivals, consolidating political advantage, and signaling intentions to both allies and adversaries. In practical terms, what does this look like? Consider missile strikes. Every strike can be framed publicly as a response to aggression. Yet each strike also achieves secondary objectives: weakening a rival's infrastructure, testing enemy response times, mapping intelligence gaps, or sending a message to other regional players who are observing carefully. Consider diplomacy. A crisis can suddenly elevate a country's international profile. Allies are drawn closer, rivals are tested, and global powers are forced to respond, sometimes in ways that serve the initiator's broader strategic goals. This is the chessboard of conflict. The pieces move quickly. What appears reactive is often proactive. What appears local is often global. And yet, most media coverage rarely explains this, because the narrative is simpler, cleaner, more digestible: a nation under attack, responding heroically. Media, of course, plays a critical role. The 24-hour news cycle thrives on urgency, conflict, and clear villains. Nuance is rarely rewarded. Ambiguity is dangerous to ratings. The result: a narrative reinforced through repetition, visuals, and sound bites, even when the full context is absent. Headlines read: Israel strikes Iranian targets, or civilians flee conflict zones. Anchors emphasize immediacy, while rarely pausing to ask, why now? Why these locations? Who gains if the situation escalates further? And who loses beyond the immediate human cost? Information flows faster than verification. And in such environments, early narratives often crystallize public opinion. Once formed, these narratives are remarkably resistant to revision, even when additional facts emerge. We've seen this pattern repeatedly. The initial framing sets the stage, and later corrections are often drowned out by the initial perception. This isn't conspiratorial thinking. It is simply a recognition of how modern information ecosystems operate. So at the beginning of this conflict, we must pause and ask, what is the story beneath the story? What are the objectives beyond defense? What calculations are being made behind the scenes, in rooms close to journalists, diplomats, and even some allied leaders? The questions are uncomfortable but necessary, Because without them, we risk accepting a narrative that is incomplete, potentially misleading, and certainly insufficient for understanding the stakes. Every conflict has layers, and every layer has consequences for civilians on the ground, for governments weighing alliances, and for global powers watching from afar. Today, as we dive deeper, we will look at Israel's strategic objectives, the implications for the United States, the historical patterns that suggest the potential for manipulation or escalation, and the global consequences that extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. Because if history teaches us anything, it is that wars rarely remain confined to the region in which they begin. They expand, they reshape, and they force the rest of the world to respond. And so we start with the official narrative, simple, straightforward, comforting, and we peel it back layer by layer to reveal a far more complex, far more consequential story. Let's step back and look carefully at what Israel's strategic objectives might actually be, because if we focus only on the headlines, defense, imminent threat, border protection, we miss the broader picture. What we see now in real time is a conflict that is as much about influence, deterrence, and long-term survival as it is about immediate security. And make no mistake, nations do not act in isolation. Every strike, every troop movement, every public statement is calibrated to achieve multiple outcomes at once, some visible, some hidden. Visualize a map. Iran's military infrastructure stretches across the country and extends into proxies across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Gaza. From Tehran to Beirut, Tehran's influence is substantial, and it is built on a network of militias, supply chains, and intelligence networks. Israel, with one of the most capable militaries in the region, views this network as a persistent strategic threat. Limiting these capabilities is not just a matter of responding to attacks. It is a calculated effort to reshape the balance of power over years, if not decades. History offers lessons here. Consider Israel's 1981 strike on Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. At the time, the world framed it as preemptive action defending national security. But in the larger context, it delayed nuclear ambitions, sent a message to adversaries, and demonstrated its willingness to act decisively beyond its borders. Similar calculations are at play. Missile strikes, targeted operations, and intelligence-driven operations all serve dual purposes: immediate neutralization of threats and the long-term reshaping of Iran's military posture. Iran's nuclear ambitions have been a focal point for decades. Negotiations, sanctions, and international pressure have slowed progress, but uncertainty remains. Israel's concern is clear: a nuclear-capable Iran represents not just a regional threat, but a fundamental shift in the Middle Eastern power equation. A single nuclear escalation could alter alliances, embolden proxies, and create pressures that extend far beyond Israel's borders. Every strike, every operation targeting research sites, transport corridors, or key infrastructure is a step in a long-term strategy, delaying, disrupting, and signaling resolve to both adversaries and allies. Wars often have domestic implications. They unify populations, distract from internal disputes, and can consolidate the authority of political leaders. This is not a conspiracy, it is political reality. Across history, leaders have seen moments of crisis as opportunities to strengthen their position. Consider the United Kingdom during the Falklands conflict in 1982. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher experienced a surge in domestic support following military action, and this support reshaped political dynamics for years. In Israel, domestic politics is tightly interwoven with national security. Conflict provides a framework to rally the population, justify policy initiatives, and suppress dissenting voices. Leaders are acutely aware of this, and they act accordingly. Conflict in the Middle East is never purely bilateral. It forces countries to take sides, alters alliances, and redefines spheres of influence. When Israel engages militarily, the ripple effect is immediate. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, each must consider its own posture. Iran's regional proxies must respond. Gulf states calculate their alliances. Even distant powers like Turkey and Russia watch closely, adjusting strategy based on every escalation. Wars shift the chessboard. Borders may not change, but influence does. Control over airspace, trade routes, energy corridors, and intelligence networks becomes a strategic objective, and every move signals intentions to friends, rivals, and global powers. Actions today are interpreted tomorrow. Israel's strikes, statements, and diplomatic initiatives are carefully observed by the United States, Russia, China, and the European Union. Every calculated action communicates a message: this is what we prioritize, this is what we will tolerate, and this is what we will resist. Failure to act decisively can be interpreted as weakness. Overreach can provoke unwanted counteractions. This signaling is subtle, layered, and continuous. Every military exercise, diplomatic engagement, and media statement is part of a broader calculus, one that extends far beyond the immediate battlefield. History provides cautionary tales. Consider the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which escalated U.S. involvement in Vietnam, or the claims of weapons of mass destruction that justified the Iraq invasion. In both cases, initial reports were accepted as fact before full verification, shaping public perception and policy in profound ways. Today, we see a similar risk. Information flows faster than verification. News cycles move in hours, while facts are established over days, sometimes weeks. Public opinion crystallizes before analysts can fully assess events. Could incidents in this current conflict be misinterpreted, amplified, or even manipulated intentionally or not? We cannot assert conspiracy without evidence, but patterns suggest that rapid escalation benefits certain actors. When narratives harden before facts are verified, decisions are influenced, resources are mobilized, and international responses are constrained by the early framing of events. Every missile, every skirmish, every diplomatic exchange has layers of meaning. Recognizing that is essential for anyone attempting to understand the broader picture. Wars, while destructive, generate benefits for certain actors. The calculus is uncomfortable, but it is real. Defense contractors see enormous demand for weapons, logistics, and technological systems. Entire industries thrive on prolonged conflicts. Political leaders, under domestic pressure, may see opportunities to consolidate authority, enact controversial policies, or distract from internal challenges. Regional rivals can exploit instability to advance their own agendas, from expanding influence to weakening opponents. Global markets respond immediately. Oil prices spike. Supply chains are disrupted. Currency valuations fluctuate. Economies from Tokyo to London feel the impact of every escalation, whether or not they are directly involved. Consider the oil market. Every military action near key production zones sends prices higher. Consumers pay more at the pump. Governments face inflationary pressures. Shipping lanes vital to global trade suddenly become high-risk zones. Insurance premiums surge. Supply chains falter, the state human and economic. Those who suffer are clear civilians in the conflict zone, displaced populations, and nations forced to respond to instability. Who benefits is less visible, but understanding the incentives is crucial to understanding the conflict itself. If we examine the past century of warfare, the pattern emerges repeatedly. Conflicts often begin with a clear, digestible narrative: defense, liberation, retaliation. Escalation follows rapidly, sometimes faster than facts can be confirmed. Certain actors benefit from prolonged engagement. Economically, politically, or strategically, global consequences from markets to alliances emerge even before the war concludes. This is not speculation. It is historical precedent, and in the current conflict, the same dynamics are at play. The public is presented with a simple story: a nation defending itself against imminent threats. The strategic reality, however, is layered, calculated, and far-reaching. Understanding the difference is essential for anyone attempting to make sense of the headlines, the diplomatic statements, and the unfolding events. Regional wars rarely remain regional. It is a lesson written in the blood of history, repeated over decades and centuries, and the current conflict in the Middle East is no exception. Every action, every escalation, every strike has consequences that extend far beyond Israel's borders or the territories of Iran and its proxies. This is a global chessboard, and every move triggers reactions. Some immediate, some delayed, some entirely unexpected. Consider the energy markets. Natural gas and critical minerals flow from the region to the rest of the world. Any disruption, real or perceived, sends prices higher. Entire economies feel the impact. Inflation rises, industries slow production, and governments must adjust budgets, sometimes cutting critical social programs or redirecting spending to buffer economic shocks. Shipping routes are another concern. The Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, and key Red Sea passages carry the lifeblood of global commerce. A localized strike or blockade in these zones can ripple across continents. Insurance premiums spike, shipping companies reroute vessels, and the cost of goods rises everywhere from supermarkets in New York to electronic stores in Tokyo. Then there is the military dimension. NATO and U.S. allies face strategic calculations. Some are pressured to act, others wary of overextension. Every engagement carries the risk of escalation, and even non-combatant states observing the unfolding conflict adjust military readiness, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic positioning. Meanwhile, powers like Russia and China are watching closely. Each action shifts their calculations about regional influence, energy security, and geopolitical leverage. In some cases, instability provides opportunities. In others, it poses risks that demand careful maneuvering, and financial markets are rarely silent observers. Global stock indices react within minutes. Currencies fluctuate. Investors shift capital to perceived safe havens. The dominance of the U.S. dollar, a cornerstone of global trade, can be subtly challenged if markets anticipate prolonged instability or energy supply disruptions. So when we consider the broader impact, the stakes become enormous. A war that may appear regional on the surface can, if left unchecked, touch the lives of millions around the globe. History has shown this over and over, from the oil crisis of the 1970s to the Gulf Wars of the 1990s and 2000s. Experts remind us that the strategic calculus in wartime is never simple. Every decision, whether by a military commander or a political leader, weighs risk, public perception, and long-term objectives. Military analysts note that preemptive actions, surprise strikes, and rapid escalation are not anomalies. They are deliberate tactics designed to achieve strategic advantage before the opposition can fully respond. Timing, intelligence, and perception are all as important as firepower. Economic historians highlight the predictable consequences of conflict. Energy markets spike, trade is disrupted, and nations with less leverage bear disproportionate costs. History suggests that those who control the narrative, the timing, and the framing of a conflict can often influence outcomes far beyond the battlefield. Intelligence experts caution that information is fluid, often manipulated intentionally or not. A small incident can be amplified to appear larger, triggering escalatory responses that might otherwise have been avoided. Patterns in past conflicts, from the Vietnam escalation to Iraq and Afghanistan, show how perception can outpace reality. Sometimes catastrophically, all of this converges into one inescapable truth: conflicts are multidimensional. The battlefield is only part of the equation. Strategy, messaging, economics, diplomacy, and global perception all intersect in ways that are difficult to anticipate yet impossible to ignore. History offers a sobering guide. Consider the following: Vietnam's 1964-1975, an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin, initially presented as unambiguous aggression, led to massive escalation. Early reports shaped public opinion long before facts were verified. Iraq, 2003, weapons of mass destruction narratives justified invasion. Later, many claims proved inaccurate, yet the momentum of policy and public perception was already irreversible. Yom Kippur Wars, 1973, surprise attacks and preemptive strikes forced nations to react under pressure, shifting alliances and altering the strategic balance of the Middle East for decades. The lesson is clear: early framing, rapid escalation, and public perception can have as much impact on outcomes as the military actions themselves. In the current conflict, we see elements of all three. It is critical not to lose sight of the human cost. Civilians in the conflict zone face immediate danger, displacement, and disruption to daily life. Hospitals, schools, and infrastructure are at risk. Refugee crises form, sometimes spilling into neighboring countries. Families are uprooted. Generations grow up amid uncertainty and fear. This dimension is often underplayed in discussions of strategy, but it is inseparable from the larger calculus. Leaders may factor it in, but for the average person, the consequences are profound, immediate, and lasting. So, what is really driving this war? We've examined Israel's strategic objectives: limiting threats, consolidating domestic political influence, reshaping the regional order, and signaling power globally. We've looked at how escalations can be influenced by perception, timing, and historical precedent. We've considered who benefits and when conflicts expand. And finally, we've traced the global consequences: markets, alliances, and energy security, all affected by events that seem at first confined to one region. The truth is not simple. It never is. But one thing is clear: the stakes go far beyond the immediate battlefield. The patterns of history are unmistakable. Those who pay attention to what's really happening, not just what they are told, are often the ones who understand the true shape of power, influence, and risk. Every war has a story beneath the headlines. The question is whether we are willing to look for, analyze it, and to confront it honestly. Pay attention. Ask the hard questions. Observe patterns, not just statements, because understanding the broader context, the strategic interests, the escalations, and the global implications is the difference between passive consumption of news and true comprehension of how power operates in a dangerous world. As history repeatedly demonstrates, wars that seem regional often reshape the global order. And today, the consequences are already unfolding, whether the public realizes it or not. The next time you see a headline or hear a statement from a government official or watch analysts dissect the news cycle, remember this: the official story is just the beginning. The real story lies beneath, and those who seek it with attention, skepticism, and an understanding of history are the ones who see the conflict for what it truly is: a contest of power, influence, and survival on a global scale.